All your motivation and drive come from a neurotransmitter in your brain called dopamine. It drives you to go after the things you need or want. You wouldn't even be able to move a muscle if it weren't for dopamine. You basically need it to function and survive, just like certain types of toys need a battery. Similarly, you need dopamine to function, so to simplify, dopamine is your battery. Now, dopamine has a rather interesting way of functioning. It has a baseline and a peak shape. Simple, let's say your baseline is 2 and your peak is 4. Let's say you eat chocolate and your dopamine suddenly peaks at 4. So after a while your levels should drop, but this time not to level 2, but much lower. In other words, the higher the peak, the lower your dopamine level. The explanation is simple. By increasing your dopamine level too often, you lowered your baseline so low that now you don't have enough dopamine reserves left for anything. As I explained at the beginning, dopamine is like a battery. It depletes the more often you increase it before the drops. You don't have different dopamine batteries for different activities. You only have one universal battery. So, if you want to have a healthy amount of dopamine reserves, you need to purposely reduce the number of things that increase it. Let's talk about solutions and what things we can do to replenish it so we have more motivation and drive. If you are liking the video, give us a like and don't forget to stay to the end for the super important information. I will use the example of exercising. Exercise always varies from person to person. So let's say you're in the middle. You don't hate working out, but you don't love it either. You hate feeling sweaty, but you want to do it because you want to improve your health. You try several times before, but you always end up losing interest and quitting. Now you've just joined the gym. You've got your mind focused on the reward, even though you're not quite convinced yet. And you're doing it every day to make it bearable. It sounds like a good plan, but there are many problems with this way of doing things. First of all, you're using multiple layers of motivators to make exercise more enjoyable. By doing that, you're conditioning your dopamine levels to be high only when you have all those layers. The key is to make sure your dopamine doesn't spike too often. Secondly, you had your focus on the reward, that is, lose weight and be healthy, but have a nice milkshake on the weekend. If you give yourself rewards for something, you tend to associate less pleasure with the activity itself than the reward elicits. Forget about adding layers of motivators before exercise and make the effort pleasurable. A good example of this is intermittent fasting. Some people have a 12-hour feeding window every 24 hours. This is how fasting works. If you are really hungry, dopamine increases, and this is why the food tastes even better. This is the big reward that comes at the end. But what happens to people who get used to intermittent fasting is that they start to have a taste for the fasting itself, not for the big dopamine release of eating after the fasting period. Their mood is clear, they like the sensation of feeling lighter, and they think about all the good things that are happening in their bodies. The dopamine release is coupled with effort. What happens is that the effort becomes the reward. It becomes easier and more rewarding over time. So to summarize everything we covered in this video, number 1. Dopamine is like a battery and every pleasurable activity drains it. Unfortunately, you only have one battery, so you must use it wisely and purposefully. Number 2. Dopamine has a baseline and a peak. The higher the peak, the bigger the drop. After that, if you keep spiking it too often with video games, social media, or anything addictive, then your baseline will get lower and lower, and you will reach a point where even getting out of bed will be a big challenge for you. Number 3. Focus on the effort. Don't increase dopamine before you exert yourself, and don't increase dopamine after you exert yourself. If you liked the video, feel free to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more content like this. See you in the next video.